Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our first panel. I am Dan Fiorino. I'm director of the Center for Environmental Policy in the School of Public Affairs. We have been working with the law school, with Amanda Leiter in the law school, to develop this two-day program. So yesterday we had our first day, and we at School of Public Affairs were the lead. It was a collaborative effort, but we were more the lead, and so the law school is more the lead for today, and it's a terrific program. So I would like to welcome you to the second day of our program. So the idea here is to think about EPA and the future of environmental protection. So what are the challenges in coming decades that EPA as an institution will face? Is EPA well equipped to deal with those challenges? What kinds of capabilities or skills or technologies will be important, or relationships in designing the EPA of the future? So this morning we have two parallel sessions. So this is the session on White House coordination of federal environmental policymaking, which any of us who have been in the federal government know is a really critically important task. And I'm going to introduce our moderator, Bridget Dooling, who's a research professor at the Regulatory Studies Center at George Washington University, which I've been told is another university in the Washington area. But we're very pleased to have you here today, Bridget, and I will turn this over to you. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for offering me safe passage through AU. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. You've chosen wisely. You are here for the morning session on White House coordination of federal environmental policymaking. I'm Bridget Dooling. I'm a research professor at the university down the street called George Washington at the Regulatory Studies Center. I joined that last summer after over 10 years as a policy analyst and some other roles in the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, an office we'll talk a little bit about today, which goes by OIRA. As you're probably aware, many different federal agencies play a role in environmental policy. On our panel today, we'll talk to former senior officials from the White House Council on Environmental Quality, which we're going to call CEQ, and OIRA, about the White House role in coordinating federal environmental policymaking across these different agencies. And we have a fun and informative lineup for you today. So let me share a little bit about each of our panelists. Brenda Mallory is Director and Senior Counsel for the Conservation Litigation Project. She served as CEQ's General Counsel. Welcome, Brenda. Howard Shalansky is Professor of Law at Georgetown University, another small university in the DC area, and partner at Davis Polk and Wardwell. Howard served as the administrator of OIRA. Welcome, Howard. And Aaron Szabo is a partner at the CGCN Group. He's a former senior counsel at CEQ and policy analyst at OIRA. Welcome, Aaron. So rather than set formal talks, our plan for the morning is to have more of a discussion within the panel, and we'll use the balance of our time together to engage with you in the audience. We have a mic up front, and I'll give you a cue when we're getting ready to call for some questions so you can get ready. Let's go ahead and get started. So Brenda, could you start us off by describing CEQ's statutory goals and its process, and also tell us a bit about your former role at CEQ?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I'm so pleased to be here. Having spent yesterday with this group, I just impressed by the richness of the discussion that we've already had, and sort of looking forward to what we find today. I was at CEQ in 2014 and came in after spending 14 years at EPA. And so that was very important ways sort of set the stage of my showing up at the White House. Stepping back on the CEQ authority, CEQ was created when the National Environmental Policy Act was promulgated. And the National Environmental Policy Act, as I think this room knows, was really an important, is referred to, in fact, as the Magna Carta of environmental law, because it sort of set the notion that there was a national policy in which federal agencies would give priority or consideration to environmental issues as part of their decision making. That there was a need to balance the kind of sort of productive use of resources with the long-term benefits and long-term sustainability of resources. And so that was a really important step in environmental law and environmental history, and CEQ was created to actually be part of the implementation mechanism for that. The office was set up with originally as 3 council members with a chair, and then a staff of experts who were to assist the administration, the president, in understanding environmental policy and on all issues that were related to environmental quality. CEQs ends up with a role that not only deals with NEPA implementation, they organized and set up the regulatory framework for that, were important in helping the agencies to develop their own infrastructure around environmental policy consideration, but also plays a very important role in assisting the administration, whatever administration, in understanding what the challenges of the moment are, how best to go about dealing with some of those issues. And I think the intention originally was a much more, an institution that had much more infrastructure than I think you see today. At its height, CEQ had over 80 employees who were scientists and other experts that were there to do reports. There were annual reports that were done that were submitted to the president and to Congress. And so all of those functions were sort of part of understanding what the environmental issues and considerations needed to be. Fast forward to 2014, and by the time I arrived, there were 7 full-time career people, a total of about 24 full-time employees. And then the bulk of CEQ's staffing was made up of detailees and interns and other sort of people who were on temporary assignments. So a very different kind of institution. It also, by 2014 and many years before that, was no longer functioning as a 3-person Senate-confirmed council, but as a 1 chairperson, a deputy, and then staff beyond that. So there were some important changes that I think obviously were affected in part by the fact that EPA came into existence. Other agencies had roles in environmental policy making, but CEQ never sort of regained its, I think, stature or institutional structure after the Reagan years. So I think that covered both points.
Thank you so much. Howard, I wonder if you could do the same, but for OIRA, and also a little bit about your role in OIRA.
Sure, thanks very much, Bridget. It's great to be here. I've worked with all the people on this panel very closely over a number of years, so and with a number of people in the room, so a particular pleasure to be here. So OIRA is not obviously principally an environmental policy organization. It's an entity that came into being in the Reagan administration, principally to do 2 things. One was to make sure that the government was not collecting too much information or placing too much burden on businesses and citizens in terms of the information that they collect. So the statutory home for the office is actually the Paperwork Reduction Act. So when you see an OMB control number on any form, mandatory or voluntary, that you fill out for the government, that control number comes from a review under the Paperwork Reduction Act that OIRA performs. And I would say OIRA does roughly 3,000 or so reviews of information collection requests from different federal agencies. But that's actually the task for which OIRA is relatively less known. It's relatively more known for regulatory review. And what OIRA does under both some statutory authority, but more under a series of executive orders that go back to the Reagan administration, but were then subsequently renewed and revised under every administration since. OIRA reviews all significant executive branch regulations. And significance has a number of different definitions under the applicable executive orders that I won't go into now. But it puts OIRA in the position of reviewing all the regulations that are going to have a high financial impact or significant policy importance out of all the executive branch agencies. And that's the way in which OIRA becomes involved with environmental policy, because the significant EPA regulations, Department of Energy regulations, Department of Interior regulations, NOAA regulations, anything, Army Corps of Engineer regulations, anything that could touch on the environment that has any significance in terms of importance to the president and the administration that's in power, financial impact on the economy, novel political issues will come through the office for review. The office is not tasked with deciding whether or not the regulation is good policy. It's really supposed to take the policy initiative as given and decide whether the execution on that policy meets certain criteria. So, for example, President Obama gave a speech in June of 2013 at Georgetown University, also here in Washington, D.C., where he outlined a very ambitious plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and set a policy directive to EPA to issue regulations that would do that. OIRA comes into being once the EPA starts to promulgate those rules and has developed a proposed regulation. That rule would go to OIRA for review. It would be reviewed under cost-benefit analysis to the extent applicable, whether the rule is based on sound evidence and science, whether the rule is taking an efficient and legally permissible course towards its objective. Now, OIRA is an office of 45 people, so it can't do all of that itself. So a lot of the legal review, regardless of who heads the office, is largely outsourced or crowdsourced, if you will, to White House counsel's office, the Department of Justice, the General Counsel's office at the applicable agency, Brenda Mallory. All of these people would be brought into a serious discussion of the legal basis for the rule. Similarly with the science, that too gets somewhat crowdsourced. We had tremendously skilled people in the natural resources branch at OIRA, but they can't do all of the analysis themselves, so they would have the relevant experts at various executive branch agencies who would have insight into the policy, comment on the rule, and go back and forth with the agency on the formulation of the rule. The other role that OIRA plays is the role of, I would say, traffic cop. There's only a fairly narrow pipeline for significant rules to come through at OIRA. The natural resources branch might have 10 people at a given time working on a set of rules. And if simultaneously one has clean water rules coming through, greenhouse gas emissions rules coming from EPA, ozone rules coming from EPA, methane venting and flaring rules coming from the Department of Interior, and various fisheries rules coming out of NOAA, one has to figure out what the priority of those rules is going to be if they all start to come into OIRA at a particular time. So in consultation with CEQ, which has much more of a policy role, much more of an inside the West Wing role, and in consultation with the President, the Chief of Staff, and the relevant policy councils, OIRA might say to Interior, great rule, hang on, we're going to get these clean power plan rules through, then we'll take venting and flaring. So there's a little bit of a prioritization and imposition of discipline role that OIRA will also play, but very much in consultation with relevant folks in the administration. So the way I would sum up OIRA's role is regulatory quality control, regulatory harmonization, because different environmental rules can clash with each other. A very good example would be EPA's cooling tower regulation created fits at Fish and Wildlife Service because they weren't sure that that rule was set up well to prevent take of certain kinds of river species of fish. And so there was a lot of tension between the two agencies there. This is a common thing. OIRA plays the role of broker and convener to harmonize where there is tension amongst the rules. And OIRA will also play a prioritization role.
Bridget, can I please follow up? Yeah, one of the things that Howard said just reminded me, like, that sort of idea of, depending on where you're sitting, your kind of view of whether or not OIRA should be handling that kind of cop role changes very much. And I can just remember, like, being a staff person at EPA and in my various EPA roles, that caused some bristling. Like, when that cop role sort of comes into play, and I think this is true of CEQ. I mean, there were things that CEQ wanted that from agencies at various times that the agencies felt like they were doing something else, or that they wanted to staff it in a different way, or they wanted to time it in a different way, and that always led to some sort of tension. And so, that the the importance of what I think of as a very important White House role for not only for staffing issues and other things that just had to do with how much you could just handle, but also the White House had its own vision about, like, how the communications rollout should be handled, or like how it fit into a plan for the month or whatever. And so that EPA's reaction at times, and as an EPA staff person or as an EPA leader, like, people would fight really hard for trying to maintain what the leadership of EPA's vision was about how the rule would be rolled out, or what the rule would say, or some of those other aspects. And so that is an ongoing dynamic and ongoing tension that I think is an important part of the relationship.
Oh yeah, I want to be very clear. I never said we were popular. In fact, when someone asked me to describe my job, I said it was very easy. I come home every day, I pull all the arrows out of my back. I throw them back out the window so they can shoot them again tomorrow. And the promise that I made to Gina McCarthy when we both sort of came into office at about the same time was, I will always tell you when I need to stab, and I will always stab from the front. And she said, that's all I can ask for. But it is a role that, and if you want to see something that really amplifies what Brenda said about how OIRA might be perceived from the agencies, my friend and colleague Lisa Heinzerling, who was chief rule writer at EPA during the first half of the Obama administration, has written an article in the Pace Law Review, I don't know, from 3 or 4 years ago, that basically indicates the displeasure that EPA had with the role that OIRA played in maybe interfering, in her view, with the preferred form of rollout.
And this is how I know you chose the right room, right? This is good stuff. This is good context for how it actually works, right? And I'm glad that you picked up on that point, Brenda, because I heard some chuckles when Howard talked about the prioritization and sort of triaging that OIRA does, and that OIRA serves as the face for that, right? But what Howard is sharing with you is sort of how that really works. OIRA often is the one that gets described as being the sort of cop on that, but there's a whole policy process often running behind it, particularly for complex issues like environmental ones. Aaron, you have a really unique role on this panel because you've worked in both CEQ and OIRA. So is there anything that you would add so far?
Yeah, just a quick little background. So I came to OIRA from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where I was there for 6.5 years. The last 2 years of the Obama administration working for Howard there. Took my role, I worked a lot. This is the first I heard that he told agencies they couldn't send stuff in, because he told me I just didn't get a day off because I had the Clean Air Act, so that was a fun blast. And then I was there for still in OIRA, the first year of the Trump administration, and then I transitioned to senior counsel at CEQ, where I had all my colleagues at OIRA saying, "Oh, now you're just going to roll us and do all the evil stuff CEQ does behind our back." And I said, "No, never." I'm like Howard. If I told them the same thing. If I'm going to stab you, I'll stab you from the front. But with respect to just kind of adding on just one thing additional that I don't think can't be understated enough is OIRA is also the face of the White House for a lot of this country. When rules are under review, I worked on the ozone NACs, I worked on the Clean Power Plan. I had, every single group, and I know a lot of people talk about, oh, it's only, or there's an appearance that it's only industry. Even when I moved to CEQ, and I know Brenda probably had the same thing, where it's if anyone wanted to come in, I don't care what party, what affiliation, I want to hear what people have to say. I'm interested in all point of views. I mean, there was for the Clean Power Plan and Ozone Next, I think each of those I had over 50 meetings personally with members of the outside, environmental groups, industry groups, all sorts of groups. I know my colleagues have also had a lot of meetings, and we are really just, a lot of times it's the only interaction that the people have with the White House. And so, I mean, it was something that I know everyone else takes very seriously as, you know, we are representing the White House to a lot of people who care deeply on these issues.
Yeah. I had one follow-up for you, Brenda. Actually, you raised the idea of CEQs, you know, the folks staffing CEQ is really evolving and oh, I'm so sorry. Got it. Thank you. Appreciate the heads up. So, Brenda, a follow-up for you on CEQ staffing over the years. It sounds like it's really sort of ebbed and flowed, and sort of the structure and number of, you know, permanent career staff has adjusted over the years, and you've supplemented with detailees and other temp staff. I just think of that in contrast with OIRA, which is largely career staff, and I just wanted to raise that as a topic in case anyone has a reaction to how that plays into the different offices and their characters and their processes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, when, you know, one of the things we're going to get to is just about things that could be improved, and in my mind, that's definitely a thing that can be improved, because I think the role that CEQ plays within the White House is really important, but the only way to be able to play it effectively is to have the resources, just like with the agencies, to have the resources to really dig into some of the issues, even with the support of the, you know, agency leadership and science experts and other legal folks. You can only take in so much, and so I do think that it takes away from the importance of having that sort of continuity within an entity that understands like what happened even in the last administration. I think that's something that OIRA has and that OMB in general has, and that EPA, for course, is full of, is you understand basically the trajectory of an issue and how it's evolved. And
how long would folks come to CEQ?
So it's ridiculous. So most of the detailees were there for like 6 months, and we would twist people's arms to get a year, and then really twist to get, a year and a half. But like if you're in the middle of an initiative, and this was a frustration that I know agencies expressed, that you'd be working with somebody on something, and then they're gone, and then there's a new person from within that same team trying to do it, and they're picking up the issue. They don't, you've already resolved in your mind a bunch of things in terms of how a particular issue is going to roll out or to be developed, and now there's a new person that you have to start all over with, and so that's a very sort of frustrating place to be for both entities. And I do think that there was a goal, certainly during my time there, where there was a greater use of like IPAs, which means something like intergovernmental personnel agreement. But that allowed for a longer period of time as opposed to a traditional detailee situation, and so that was a way to try to accommodate it.
Got it. Okay. Any other follow-ups from the panel on that?
I just wanted to add to what Brenda said. The CEQ budget is $3 million, and I think it's been the same $3 million for 20 some odd years. So I mean, and OIRA had the same issue with budget. It turns out Congress doesn't like to give the White House more money for various reasons, regardless of the presidency. But yeah, I mean, that's something that we talked about as well, was just, our operating budget hasn't even been adjusted, and CEQ wasn't even adjusted for inflation. So it's, things are getting more expensive. There's travel, there's everything. So it's a very small operating budget.
Okay, thank you. The next question is directed to all panelists. And in your experience, and citing examples where you can, what works well about the current CEQ and OIRA processes? In any order.
So I think, as I was trying to explain, like the NEPA part of CEQ's portfolio is sort of the standard. That's what I think of as the norm. Everything else is, duties as assigned, new initiatives, those sorts of things. And so, the NEPA part has some regular order to it that includes, I think, tools that are important in other areas. Like, for example, the NEPA program does regular meetings, I call them convenings, with all of the NEPA leadership at the agencies to use that as an opportunity to kind of elevate what are concerns that the agencies are having with implementation. Are there ways that CEQ can help to, through guidance or through other, vehicles, help move the NEPA process in a way that is more efficient and more effective, which has been like a theme for decades in terms of NEPA implementation. And so that's an example of, I think, a way in which the White House offices in general, but certainly CEQ, work well with the agencies, which is to do these sort of convenings of high-level people, stakeholders, and others to address issues. In the special areas, like, there's a task force that's created intentionally to evaluate an issue, like illegal fishing was one that was a big thing during the Obama years. It started out as just a series of meetings where CEQ was bringing in both the agencies as well as stakeholders in the fishing industry to talk about like what some of the issues were. There had been, obviously, illegal fishing had been identified as an issue of concern, and I think there was a desire to understand from the agencies and from the stakeholders what that meant, what kinds of processes already existed, and whether there were some changes or revisions that would be helpful. That then led to a task force, and the task force does what I think a lot of the executive order and PM presidential memos that are directed from the president are helpful in doing, which is it creates a structure around which activities can occur. A steering committee is created, a schedule is created, a deliverable on reports and whatever. And I think that's an important White House function that, again, I think it's appreciated more when the agencies want it and ask us to do it, and appreciate it less when it's on our own initiative. But it's a way to sort of like create a process so that at the end of it, it results in some, deliverable action. In this case, there was a proposed rule, there was then a final rule, and that's, I think, the combination of the tools that I think the White House can use. So you convene, you do task forces, you do MOUs among the agencies as a way to organize the activities.
Thank you.
I think from the OIRA perspective, I think that OIRA functions extremely well as a convener of agencies that may have interests that bear on a particular rule. So there's a very high degree of continuity and professionalism in the OIRA staff. I'm looking at Danielle Jones and Vlad Dorjitz who are here. When you have people like that who have been, for quite a number of years at the agencies, developing a lot of expertise and working with their counterparts, they're able I think, to build a degree of trust with the permanent staff at the agencies. And therefore, when a rule comes in, very quickly, they know who to send the rule out to in the different agencies. They will very quickly say, look, we need your comments. There's an understanding that the process matters, that if you miss the window of opportunity to comment, the rule is going to move on without you. So I think that convening process of getting all of the agencies with an interest in the rule to comment, to get their piece said, to get that feedback back to the promulgating agency is a process that works well, that's extremely effective. It avoids a lot of tensions or contradictions in rules that would otherwise arise. And it allows for leveraging expertise that may be compartmentalized in different agencies, across different agencies. To be sure, people at EPA may know a lot of their relevant counterparts at Interior or at Energy, but they also may not. And so it's very helpful to get those views shared. I think where the process sometimes runs into tension is when one moves beyond process and commentary from experts around the different agencies into specific substantive disagreements that OIRA might have with the agencies. And I think that's where some of the frustration that Brenda alluded to might come in. And it's very understandable. You have an executive order with a set of criteria. You have experts in an agency who've been working sometimes for years, but at least for months on a rule. These are folks who typically have devoted years to becoming expert on a set of problems or on a topic area. And then they're being told, after all of that work and that, internal, sort of analysis and incremental balancing of the right approach by somebody in a different office who hasn't been involved with that process, who may have less specific substantive expertise, saying, well, when I look at that against this general executive order, it doesn't really do what it needs to do. You didn't consider the following alternatives, or you could achieve higher net benefits by going down this other road. And that, that leads to a certain kind of, of friction and frustration. I don't know if there's a way to make that better. I think the thing that OIRA has done successfully to make it work well is to build in that professionalism, that long-term experience, and that trust so that people know, at very least in the agencies, when I get pushback from OIRA, it's not because of some kind of specific partisan or policy agenda. It really is because of the executive order criteria. But I think that one of the ongoing challenges that OIRA is always trying to meet is how to maintain that trust, how to do a better job in convincing the agency that the substantive directions in which OIRA itself is pushing the rules are justified. And I think I don't know if there's a great way to solve that problem. You can't turn OIRA into a 500-person office with huge pockets of expertise that can second guess HHS on tobacco health, or second guess NOAA on migratory whales. You have to have one or two people who know how to deal well with the agencies, be respectful of their expertise, yet still nudge them in the direction of doing further analysis, alternative analyses. So one of the things that is, I think, a bit tricky is the question of whether OIRA should be more available for consultation at earlier stages in regulatory development. This is a bit controversial for a lot of people, particularly advocates in various policy areas would not be happy to see OIRA getting involved earlier. They want the experts at the agency with the statutory authority making the determinations they're supposed to make under the statute, not a relatively unaccountable group of people at the White House in a somewhat opaque process telling them what direction to go in. But it might actually ease some of the tension over substance if there were that earlier engagement. But there are arguments on both sides of that. So OIRA's, I think, fantastic on the process. I think always sincere and working honestly under the executive orders to on the substance. But that's the area where the tension's always going to arise.
Sure.
Because I think that the point that you made about relationships is like so critical, like that sort of the long-term institutional relationships that exist between the folks at OMB and the folks at the agencies, EPA in particular, are really important. And it works good and bad. Sometimes because of those long-term relationships, you need somebody to come in and help kind of move people beyond the last rule in terms of people's memory of a particular issue. But I do think ultimately, in the way that both OIRA and CEQ operate, that having those relationships and having those relationships at the political level is really important, because there are going to be issues in which there's disagreement. There's absolutely no question about that, or sort of differences in emphasis on a particular issue. And when the leadership at least is interacting in a way that allows for some outlet for the staff, and that also will result in there being sort of an elevation at an earlier phase to try to resolve things, I think that's really important. And things that have worked best, I think usually are built around those existence of those relationships. And then also on the earlier things, I think there are times, I certainly have been involved in my time at EPA, where there will be ideas that are being discussed at the agency where, because of those relationships, the staff does reach out to their counterparts in OIRA just to kind of ground truth whether there's any point in, going much further with this idea. And people have, different reactions to that. There's one view which is, do the policy that you think is the right policy, and then we'll do the OIRA battle. And another view is, like, why spend all this time doing this thing that we know is going to be shot down in OIRA? So, like, there is, like, I think some of that goes on depending on the program already, but I understand why there might be some concern about it.
Yeah, and I mean, what Brenda's really, hitting on is these offices might function very differently, administration to administration, or even over the course of a single administration, because the personnel really do matter. You can specify a lot in statute, and you can specify a lot in executive order, but it really is the working relationships that evolve, and those evolve very differently administration to administration. There were some agencies with which I felt I had, I'd say most agencies I felt like had terrific working relationships because there was a lot of continuity at the head of the various cabinet departments during the Obama administration. To the point that, when Bob Perciasepi told me he was leaving EPA, that was very depressing to me, not just as a loss to EPA, but I could always pick up the phone and say, I don't understand what we're hearing from EPA. And I would get an explanation that was clear, that was helpful, and that sometimes told me to get lost. But it was based on something I could trust. Those kinds of relationships are incredibly important. Or getting a phone call from Janice Schneider at Interior saying, look, there are going to be parts of this rule that you're not going to like, but here's why we're doing it. And before you shoot back, can we have a conversation? Those kinds of relationships will affect how any of these offices work. And it's not clear that those are always going to, the OIRA might have the same wonderful staff, but if everything at the top has very different set of relationships, the office is going to work with, very differently administration to administration. What's remarkable is that over really going back into the Reagan administration, all the former OIRA administrators are all friends. We all talk to each other. We all, I talk to my counterparts from Republican administrations often. I think John Graham was a fantastic OIRA administrator, upheld the values of the office, was extremely effective in his administration, was well respected by cabinet heads, not because he did what they wanted, but because even when he didn't, they understood why. That worked well because of the way those relationships worked. So to me, one of the most important things for the success of OIRA is keep the professionalism of the staff, maintain the working environment and the value of the work so that you keep wonderful people there. But also, the administrator has to be set up in a way to have successful working relationships with the rest of the administration. And one thing that I will note that is key, and that I think has carried over across most administrations, is that there never be an end run around OIRA on disputes over rules to the president or the chief of staff. To be sure, there's an elevation path. And on a handful of rules, we did wind up sitting around a table with the president who would make the call. More often, it would be sitting around the chief of staff's table. But even more often than that, when there were serious disputes, the chief of staff would say, why am I hearing about this? I don't want to hear about this. Go back and work it out. Setting a tone of it being a failure for things to have to elevate. And that meant that cabinet secretaries, deputy secretaries, office heads, and the OIRA administrator and the staff of OIRA realized we have to sit down and work this out together. We better learn to play well together. So there was a management component from the top of any administration that's going to affect how well OIRA or CEQ can do their jobs.
That's fair. Aaron?
I can just add on a couple things. Mostly because when I was in OIRA, it was more of a you wait for the rule to come in kind of interaction. And then I moved to CEQ where I expanded to basically the whole energy and environment portfolio. That was fun because we do not have the large staff that they had in the last administration.
But all you were doing was doing red X's, right?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, that's it. But I then started getting engaged much earlier. I mean, kind of as Howard said, it's a relationship game. I have a lot of friends at the political and career level at the EPA and Interior. There's not been a single person that I think is malicious across any administration. I told Bridget I was going to mention that, like political or otherwise. I don't think it. I mean, everyone's trying to do what they think is best for the country. But being engaged so much earlier, what ended up happening a lot of times was I'm not an expert on Clean Water Act, but hey, I'm involved earlier, and I wanted to help OIRA get involved earlier, so I would go to like Vlad, or if I was dealing with toxics, I'd go to Danielle and say like, hey, I'm hearing this. Like, I know this isn't your official review time, but like, is this crazy? Like, because I just need to know, because like my reading is X, but I'm not an expert on that. I need another opinion, and trying to get them more involved earlier, at least as kind of at a minimum, as kind of Howard was talking about, that initial check, because in my position at CEQ, being able to be involved much earlier and as before the process, I can say, hey, at a minimum, maybe you guys should run this by OIRA right now, or maybe you guys should take this back and think about that, whether that's at the career level or talking at the political level. But you know, we talk about what, you know, Bridget asked about what's the great parts about the process. A lot of the great parts of this current process are things you don't ever see because they're not problems. I don't know what the capture rate of the White House is of all rules, but I assume it's very, very, very high. And the fact that all these rules, significant rules, are going through OIRA, are going through the White House before they are made public, it's just something no one realizes unless something doesn't go through it. But it's all those things you don't realize, is what I'd say like the great processes are.
Got it. All right, thanks. And we've covered some of this already, but turning to some of the challenges, what do you think could be improved at both CEQ and OIRA?
I mean, there's a couple things. One is clearly on the government-to-government level, I believe earlier engagement is always better, because it should be a collaborative discussion. I know there's some EPA people in here, either current or former, who when they hear OIRA, they go, God, those people. But it should be it should be a more collaborative process. I do think you know that's a better way to do things. I understand as someone who wrote rules at the NRC, working on rules for years, and then in 90 days having another person telling you that everything, kind of what Howard was saying, you didn't know what you were talking about for the past years. And so, I mean, I strongly believe that, at least from a government to government level. The other thing that I'm a big proponent of is removing the black box mentality kind of in OIRA. I don't think it's necessarily good that the public doesn't have a great mentality of what OIRA is and isn't. And a lot of times, by the way, OIRA gets blamed for a lot of stuff that's not OIRA. If anything gets held up, it's OIRA's fault, even if it's other agencies or other reasons. But I think that it just would be generally better for OIRA as an institution, as well as to just be a little, you know, for people in the public to better understand what is actually going on within the what people call the black box, or, you know, I sent to some of my friends, the congressman called us well, OIRA, not me anymore, the trolls at OMB, just to get better explain what actually happens and give the public a better understanding of why this is beneficial. So,
Aaron, do you mean in general, or do you mean with respect to, you know, particular reviews?
I think that in general, it would be helpful. I think just as much as you can uncover, I'm not saying give people the early, I know there's been discussions about like, oh, the public should just get the rule publicly when OIRA gets it. I don't think that's a good idea. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying all the pass back between agencies, the deliberative process being made public. I just think more of what is actually happening inside this black box. Mm-hmm. The White House in general, I think, is thought of as a black box. I mean, at CEQ, no one really understood other than NEPA. They were like, oh, what else do you do? It's like, oh, actually, we do all this other stuff that was Brendan just talking about. It's like, oh, well, how do you do that? And I just think like better education is really beneficial to both the strength of OIRA and just the strength of the White House, and good for the country. So.
Very good. Other challenges you'd raise?
Yeah, so I already mentioned the one about staffing, which I do think from an institutional perspective for CEQ would help the agencies that come to CEQ for help as a really important one.
Do you think it's like an order of magnitude more that you're looking for, or just on the margin? Like, what do you think makes sense?
What's realistic? Like, what can you really achieve? I would say get as much as you can.
Yeah.
I think Aaron's point about that no one's going to give a lot of staff to a White House office is a true point. So I mean, better than 25. Better than 7 career. Like that would be of great assistance. I think also during my time at CEQ, we didn't have a chair. And so I think it's just really important institutionally for there to be a chair of CEQ who is Senate confirmed, who is able to participate in the conversations across the agency in the same way. I mean, I think we treated Christy Golfus, who was the managing director, as much as possible as someone who was the leader of the institution, but it's not the same. I think there is in government, there is just and I don't know if it's at the staff or at the level of the Senate confirmed folks, but I think people don't feel like they have to treat as seriously things coming from someone who is not at their level. And so that's, I think that's important. Glad to see there is a chair now. The other thing, just as sort of a follow-up on the conversation yesterday about public-private partnerships, which I also think are really important. The Obama administration, I think, invested a lot of time in also trying to encourage the development of such partnerships. I think we probably are at a point, although someone also said yesterday that there's not going to be any statutory changes. There needs to be like an assessment of what the public-private partnerships take and the authorities that the agencies and even offices within the White House have to engage. Like the ethics issues and endorsement issues, which I know we don't hear a lot about now, but they exist in the statutes that we're trying to implement. And so trying to make it clear that there is flexibility for certain types of engagement in those public-private partnerships, I think would be useful for the role that the White House could play in helping the agencies.
I'll just say a word about transparency. I mean, this is always a big issue for OIRA because the public doesn't see the passbacks. And actually, that's really what people want to see. You can post all the meetings you want. You can post all of the, rules once they've gone through all the passback process. I think what people really want to see is what are the changes that are occurring in progress back and forth between OIRA and the agencies. And I'm sympathetic to the desire for people to see that, but I do think that there is real value in keeping the deliberative process reasonably invisible. A number of things would happen if you opened up the back and forth between OIRA and the agencies to sort of constant scrutiny, such that every passback was visible. First of all, I think you'd have relatively uninformative passbacks because there's a lot of stuff, there are mistakes that get made, there are questions that get asked that are hard questions. There are things that could taken out of context to make somebody look inept or look silly. These all go back and forth relatively fluidly as part of a conversation between desk officers at OIRA, agency staff, the different agency staff that are commenting. What would happen is you'd get very anodyne kinds of comments and all the serious stuff would be driven to telephone calls, which would be, I think, quite inefficient. So I actually don't think it would be terribly illuminating because you really want to keep that honest and frank back and forth. And there's stuff that gets put in passbacks that, you could imagine being pulled out and being embarrassing. The other thing is, I think that there are a lot of very nasty partisan views on rules in both directions on any rule. And there has been effort to embarrass and call out and dox OIRA desk officers, people who come to work just to do like hard, sincere work every day. I was under a lot of pressure to reveal Vlad Dorjitz's name by the chairman of a powerful House committee. And I refused. I said, hold me in freaking contempt. No. Why do you possibly need that information? So what happens is if you start to open up all of these passbacks, there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be people, figuring out who the desk officers are. There's going to be harassment. This is actually a real thing. It actually happens on a lot of the more heartfelt rules. So I don't think, again, that's just be more reason that you create a perverse incentive structure if you open up the deliberative process. The other thing I would say is this, is that, I do think when it comes to the changes in a final rule that don't go back out for comment, some kind of summary of the major changes, which is something OIRA is supposed to provide, I think that should be provided. Here are the major changes in the final rule, because the public doesn't get to comment on that again. On a proposed rule, public gets to comment on the proposed rule. They get a black line of the, you can get a red line of the rule as it came in and the rule as it left. Where the particular changes come from, I don't think is particularly helpful. And if we had to label those, a lot of the agencies that do comment very candidly on other agencies' rules wouldn't, because they don't want it to be known this came from EPA or this came from energy. So I think OIRA plays a useful anonymizing function that actually increases candor and increases the quality of discussion on rules. So transparency is really double-edged. There are certain things I would like to see OIRA do that would increase the transparency. Summary of major changes, I think some document that would say, here's the big things that changed from when OIRA and why, so an explanation of that. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing. I think it's perfectly reasonable for OIRA itself to post, as soon as a rule goes back to an agency, the red line of the rule as it came in against the rule as it went out for public comment. That's something we're supposed to provide when asked. I actually wanted to just go ahead and post it so that we, why make people ask for it and go through some process and wait 2 weeks? We have this. Let's have it and post it on the website. For a variety of reasons, that met with a lot of opposition from some of the legal folks around the administration. They thought it would provoke unnecessary lawsuits. It would make it easier for people to find things to challenge. That's part of the democratic process, and that's part of transparency. And I don't really have a problem with that. And I think it would help OIRA if it were a little more forthcoming with some things like that. But I'm after spending nearly 4 years at the office, I've really become increasingly convinced that the deliberative process is something that needs to be protected, because opening that up will just have perverse incentives and will not be more revealing to the public.
Yes, I would like to echo that, because the Clean Air Act has a provision in it that required basically all written materials actually between any agency and EPA during the interagency review to be made public. So I spent a lot of time going through agencies' comments who sent it to me to put it in an anonymized form so that we actually could provide that type of protection of people making comments. But it was very onerous, and then because what you end up happening is on both sides you have people who will dig through those because it's all public and then say, oh, look at this comment, look what the White House did. And by the way, because it's all anonymized, it's look what OIRA did, look what OIRA did. And that's part of the job at OIRA, unfortunately, is you take the arrows and be like, yeah, that was me. And, I laughed at them when I was no longer at OIRA because I knew a lot of these comments weren't them when they were getting blamed, because I got blamed a lot when I was at OIRA for these comments. But I mean, it is tremendously onerous, and it drove people to calls. I mean, it has done that, and like all my other colleagues who didn't work on the Clean Air Act were like, "Oh no, we just sent them over." I was like, "Oh, that's a nice time that I get to spend." So I just wanted to echo that. Like, I strongly agree with that.
Yeah, really unique process for those rules. Yeah. Brenda mentioned the importance of confirmed leadership at CEQ. OIRA currently has an acting administrator. I wonder if there's anything to say about the importance of confirmed leadership at OIRA.
I think so. I do think it's tremendously important because of exactly what Brenda said. I mean, first of all, you learn something going through the confirmation process, which is that you meet a lot of people up on the Hill. You do visits around to all the Senate committee members who are going to vote on you. You also meet the folks who are going to be on your oversight committee on the House. That's actually a very useful thing. You want to have those dialogues. It's good to know the people up on the Hill, to have those contacts. And you are viewed differently by others in the administration who have gone through confirmation if you have gone through confirmation yourself. And I just think that, an acting person is limited in time by statute. They are, in some sense, going to have less authority, less ownership of any of the things that they're doing. So I think it's very important to have confirmed leadership because you are just viewed as being more permanently in charge of your office. And, you know, a DepSec or a cabinet secretary is going to be less respectful, even if they're personally respectful, less respectful of the authority represented by somebody who's a placeholder. And there have been excellent acting administrators, phenomenally good acting administrators. But I think that it's not healthy for the office because it also signals a lack of importance in the eyes of the White House if they haven't made the effort to nominate somebody for confirmation. So, you know, if your office is viewed as low priority because it wasn't worth putting somebody up for confirmation, makes people think, we don't have to deal with them. You know, there's a way around this. Let me see what I can do. And that creates bad incentives all down through the system.
And do you think that I understand that's how that signal is perceived. Do you think that is what it means? Do you think it really does signal a lack of priority?
Not necessarily. I think, and you know, that really depends on what else is going on in the world at a given time. It's also not an easy job to fill in some ways. I mean, it's a peculiar job. I only came to their attention because I was a finalist for another Senate confirmed position. And in the course of interviewing me for that, they said, we'd rather you do this other job. And just because I, in the Clinton administration, had been at the Council of Economic Advisors, I actually knew what it was. So I said, oh, that's, you know, that's a really interesting job.
You didn't have to Google it.
Right, I have thick skin, I can do that job, it'd be really interesting. But so it could be, it's hard to fill. Also, if you think about if there is a broken confirmation process in the Senate, you know, why stick somebody in line for a position that's never actually going to come up for confirmation? Let's just get somebody in there who can, you know, do the work acting, and we'll worry about this later. And let's deal with, you know, our judges and the other things that we really have to get through. So it could just reflect the reality of the political process.
Got it.
Can I just add to that? Because I do think that there was a point, certainly at the second term of the Obama administration, where getting people confirmed became impossible. I mean, and I think that was true at EPA as well. And so, so I think that dynamic really influenced how people prioritized putting people in position.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to emphasize, I mean, I actually tried to leave. And on a Sunday afternoon, I got a phone call that I'll just describe as highly persuasive, or from a highly persuasive source that basically said, you can't leave. You know, not that you're so great, but we have zero chance of getting anybody else in the job over the next 18 months, and you've built the relationships. Like, you know, please reconsider, which I did. But it was partly because, you know, there was this wonderful person who I said is waiting just to be, you know, a terrific administrator. They said, you're right, she'd be fabulous. And there's no chance the committee would take her up in the time we have remaining.
Tricky. Okay, we're going to do one last sort of capstone question, and then we're going to turn to you for some questions. So be thinking now about what you might like to ask, and I'll direct one more question back to the panel. So stepping back and thinking at a broad level, when an administration seeks to address a broad environmental challenge, such as climate change or other complex and cross-cutting issues, what's the proper White House role to ensure that all relevant agencies are pulling more or less in the same direction? And I think this panel is particularly well positioned to answer this question because everyone on this panel not only worked in White House coordinating roles, but also worked in other roles in executive branch and independent agencies. So really interesting mix of experiences here. So over to you in any order that you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think in describing what I think has worked well, which is that sort of capacity to get the right people in the room at the right time to discuss issues, I think that is what that's certainly what CEQ is meant for. That's the sort of the nature of the, I think, the assignment of that type of an entity, and it's I think it's an important role, particularly for the more complex issues. I think the illegal fishing is a great example because one of the issues there simply was no one really owned the whole issue. Like the fixing of the problem was not going to be handled by one agency. And so anytime you have an issue that really does involve multiple agencies to engage and to put resources into it, that having a way to get the conversation going and try to sort out and arm wrestle about who should do what at what point, I think is really important.
Thank you.
I think setting the priorities, I think first of all, just say as a legal and constitutional matter, I think the White House can and should play a leadership role in coordinating the executive branch agencies' environmental policies. And I think that they should have, they should set the priorities from the top and make sure that, okay, what's the list of rules we'd like to get through, the list of things we'd like to accomplish, which agencies have to be involved, and get them all around the table and say, you are all part of this greater overarching policy, and you are accountable. And there has to be accountability for the progress of the rules and an ordering. And we had a priority list. Brian Deese had in his office, basically a list of what were the key rules and how are they moving forward. And all of us knew that if things weren't flowing well, we were going to be around the table there being asked why we were not moving forward. And for that reason, I would say Christy and Brian and Brenda and I were meeting constantly on a whole host of rules and with the agencies. But it's really got to be, it does have to be set from the top. You can't simply say, here's what we want to accomplish, here's an executive order, go forward under your statutory authorities. There has to be regular care and feeding of that process, and it has to be done at sort of an assistant to the president level. Otherwise, it's not going to happen because the agencies will go off and do their own thing.
I don't just kind of echo again. I believe the White House does have the authority, they have the power. One of the strongest things that the policy councils have, and that's just even the other, whether it's DPC, NEC, Domestic Policy Council and the National Economic Council, one of the strongest powers they have is the power to convene. I don't think it's good for the public. I don't think it's really good for the country when you have agencies implementing different policies, especially when they're intrinsically tied to each other. I don't think that's good for anyone. And so I just believe very, very strongly that the White House should have a very strong role in both the convening as well as in helping set the policy with the agencies.
All right, very good. So we have a mic up front. Please do step up. We're going to play this Jeopardy style, so please do form your comments in the form of a question. We would appreciate that so very much, and I will make awkward eye contact if you testify, okay? So do form a question for us, and so that we can get through the nice line of questions forming. I'd love if you ran the mic, sure. Yeah, okay, so we have a helper who just wrapped. But now you're in line. Okay. We're going with a line. We're going to keep the line. Okay, very good. Take it away, sir. Thank you. Ooh. Just one moment. There we go.
At a function which...
Nope, still not on.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
I wanted to ask a question about a function that used to be performed by CEQ, but which is no longer done. And should we have this function in the government? And if so, where should it go? Should it go to EPA or someplace else like the Congress? This is the function that CEQ did in writing annual reports and looking at large issues. So yesterday we were talking about the big issues of transportation, population, water use, climate change. And now we're in that age of big data where a lot of data can be digitized and analyzed in a way that we could not do that back in the 1970s. So some people have argued we need to have an objective, independent view of environmental data, which could be put out for everybody to use, including the private sector in these partnerships, et cetera. So should we have such a function? We don't have it today, I would argue. Can we trust EPA to do that, or would they be seen as not independent? And where should it go? Should we have it, and where should it go?
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a loss, and it's a perfect example of how the CEQ continued to have the obligation to do annual reports even when they didn't have staff. And so it was seen as sort of the relief of a burden when that was taken away, because there wasn't really the staff support to do it. But it is a loss. It's a real loss in having an entity that is looking writ large across the government at the issues that are before us and the kind of the opportunities. So I think it would be a great thing, but you wouldn't be able to get CEQ to do it unless there was staff for that. There was appropriations language that I think reappears that got rid of it.
Thank you.
My name's Dave Ulrich. I spent 30 years with US EPA in Chicago, and then 14 years working with a group of 140 mayors around the Great Lakes from US and Canada. And I'll preface my remark and question by saying I wouldn't even begin to pretend to know how Washington works, but this has been very instructive. And let me also reassure you that there is a big, diverse country out there that is very interested in a better environmental enterprise in the future. First, a question for CEQ, and then one for OIRA. With CEQ, much of the discussion yesterday was oriented towards maybe a more collaborative and convening and consensus-building process for solving environmental problems than necessarily the regulatory and bang people over the head process, which I did a lot of and enjoyed, actually. But I'm wondering, and the perception, at least from the regions, is that CEQ doesn't have the clout in Washington to really bring people together, with or without a confirmed leader. So is an element of strengthening CEQ more in this role, both within government and outside, in a convening and consensus building role, perhaps something that could be part of the new environmental enterprise? Secondly, for OIRA, the perception, I think, out in the regions is that this rulemaking process is so slow and so long and so uncertain that by the time a rule finally comes out and survives legal challenges, the world, which is changing more rapidly, more dramatically, and more things changing all the time, the rule is almost outdated by the time it comes out. And then, even if it does and is approved...
Last, I must ask for a question.
Yeah. No, and my question is, do we need to look more towards non-regulatory and non-rulemaking approaches in the future? So, CEQ first.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I think the idea and the sort of, in some ways, the diminishment of CEQ over the decades is probably why there's some sense of CEQ not really having the authority. But I mean, I assure you that when CEQ is working, it has a lot of influence. I always think about there being people have power sometimes by virtue of their authority, and sometimes they have power by virtue of proximity to authority. And so during the Obama years, for sure, I think we felt like CEQ was very effective at getting the leadership in the White House in support of the efforts that we thought were necessary and were able to sort of deliver on important priorities. Whether there could be a more explicit statutory authority for CEQ, I mean, that would be great. I don't think you'll get it. I mean, like, I think someone, when I was asking about, like, how could, CEQ be better? One of the suggestions was CEQ ought to have authority that allows it, specifically directs it as the office that decides things. Right now, I think much of CEQ's authority is about getting people together, and from that process, teeing up something that can then be decided by the president and the president's senior advisors. Explicit authority for CEQ on certain issues, that wouldn't be terrible.
Just real quick, I think the number of rules that become outdated because of a lengthy progress is relatively small, but it is a problem, and it's the trade-off for having a very public and transparent and accountable process with judicial review, and I think the benefits of that process offset the harms. As a general matter, I would not be in favor of letting more things go through the guidance or more opaque route, but there are mechanisms, such as direct-to-final rules and things like that for things that are truly urgent.
And I guess I'll just weigh on both topics very quickly. The first thing is CEQ currently is going through revising their NEPA regulations, which is going to be one of the most substantive things that the White House will do, especially environmental provisions in this administration. It's a massive undertaking, and I think that will just inherently change CEQ's perceived authority. With respect to the OIRA review process, I completely agree with Howard. I was very happy to see not too long ago this administration put out an executive order, a memo to the agencies from Russ Vaught. I know a lot of articles were written on about how this impacts independent agencies. I also think this significantly impacts what people call dark matter, this idea of basically regulation through non-regulatory mechanisms, which, having been on the outside for only 6 months now, I hear a lot from people, and I heard that when I was at CEQ a lot of times, where people there's a lot of these types of things, that guidances and so forth, which is stated as non-regulatory, but for instance, a lot of states will just follow guidance because that's the easiest thing to do.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tom Kelly, and for a number of years I was responsible to manage the rulemaking process at EPA, the Administrative Procedure Act, the Paperwork Reduction Act. Dan Fiorino and I worked together on that for quite a while. And I had an opportunity, I just want to say this first, and then I will ask a question. I had an opportunity to see the OIRA desk officers in a way and from a perspective a lot of people in our agency could not. And I came away with the highest respect for those people, for their intelligence, for the extraordinary work ethic, and by and large for their integrity, even though I knew that they were operating under a lot of pressures that many of us could not see. But I simply wanted to say that up front. Okay. You started, Howard, with a description of the statutory basis for OIRA, which is the Paperwork Reduction Act. So I want to ask the perennial question, because we're here to talk about the future of EPA, and that is, how do you get a paperwork collection request through the process when the staff is so small and they are totally preoccupied with hot rules? And by the time they say they will once I get through these hot rules, I'll look at your paperwork, then they got 8 more hot rules by the time they do that. How do we solve that? Because I know of many, many worthwhile research projects that just died because simple requests simply could not get attention.
Thank you.
I'll start by saying that OIRA does get through thousands of these things a year, and most of them go through fairly quickly. Where there is a significant burden or potentially sensitive data involved, often there are a lot of questions that go back from OIRA about the utility and the need for it and whether there are alternatives. And some of those are withdrawn or people find alternative means of getting the data rather than going through a government collection. But the other solution there is, and I didn't talk much about it, is staffing. And you could increase the staffing. Unlike other offices, members of Congress are always wanting to throw more resources specifically at OIRA. But, and I would always be told, wouldn't you like more money for OIRA? And being part of OMB, my response was, all of OMB works hard and every part of OMB could use more money, sir. Yes, but you can't say that.
All right, and alas, this will have to be our last question. I'm so sorry, folks, at the end, but I'm sure you can approach afterwards. I'm sure we'll be around, but we don't want to eat up your break, so thank you so much.
Well, what you described is really very different from the OIRA during the previous 20, 25 years before the Obama administration came in. I mean, there was a real effort that made a difference in trying to put in place a much more constructive and collaborative process despite what John Graham told you, who John was personally great about working with people, the staff relationships were pretty toxic. And so because our focus is the future, the things I heard that need to be kind of locked in the next administration, and I'd like to see if you disagree with any of these, is the policy direction early on needs to be clear in terms of what administration policies OIRA is supposed to be trying to help implement. There does need to be transparency, but it's accountability. And I think transparency kind of confuses people because you can't be completely transparent. But the idea of the red line strikeout of what happens before and after would go a long ways towards creating accountability. There's never been enough focus on implementation from OIRA. The dirty secret is that sometimes within EPA, we end up reaching compromises on rules that make sense between the Air Office and the Enforcement Office or something, but they don't necessarily mean it can be really well implemented. There's an area where OIRA could play an important role. Early interactions are good because you can flag issues.
I appreciate your suggestions, but I do need a question.
And then, well, the question is whether any of these are inappropriate for the future. The last one is just this question about how long the rulemaking process goes on. Part of OIRA's role can be to frame and escalate the issues so the decisions can be made at senior levels of the conflicting agencies, and there's not enough of that goes on quickly enough in the process.
Thank you.
So I agree with all of the above. I agree with all of the suggestions above, and in terms of time, normative time is something OIRA is always fighting. But at the end, I think there's a little too much focus on that because they do meet on average the 90-day normative time, and the rules that go beyond that, there's usually a good reason for it.
All right, thank you all so very much. We so appreciate your time in panel. Please join me in thanking my panel. I apologize. You may have certainly approached my colleagues.
There's no discussion about
afterwards.
EPA, the implications for EPA's future.
The audience whether they want to stay 5 minutes.
Folks are welcome to stay if you'd like. You're welcome to stay if you'd like. I just want to release anyone who needs to take a break. Please feel free to take a break. If my panelists don't leave, I assume they will imply their consent to take your question, although I don't know if they'll hear you.
Back in line.
Thank you all so much.
I'm sorry. EPA, the environment, involves all these other agencies. You can't operate without... I'm not being heard. Do you want to hear this?
All right.
Hello. How do you have the kind of coordination of environmental policy and regulation that you need at the White House level? And
just come up. Just come talk to us. It's okay.
No, please. I don't. I want to hear. I want to get.
Unfortunately, I'm afraid
them.
Folks can't hear. So, with one final moment, please join me in thanking our panelists. Apologies for the complicated ending there. Thanks so much.
Only about the regulation process. It wasn't about EPA's role in NEPA. Hello.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay. Are we on?
No, I think everybody's talking. Even if you're on, I don't think it was the volume would be high enough to talk over to people. Should have set more time for questions.
It was stupid. The point is to have interaction with the audience. You have this huge reservoir of expertise.
It's tricky though because there's also the most value in everything they said. So like maybe longer sessions.
Most of the people here know most of what they said.
Yeah, that's true. I guess depends if the audience is all like how much over in EPA and current and past EPA versus other. And I think most of the audience here is EPA, right?
Yeah, sure. Or if not, related agencies that have the same interaction.
Yeah.
You're at OMB now?
I am, yeah. I'm at a wire right now. Yeah, I do water.
You do water?
Yeah, clean water act.
How long have you been there?
5 years.
So Art Pratt's left by the time.
Exactly. So Art got replaced by this lady. Kind of comments. Oh, really? I've heard very a little bit. Did they answer your question? Oh, just.
Of course, we did that on purpose. Absolutely.
Very good. Well, good luck at one.
We're not at the point yet where people are, unless they have a court order required that. But they're all recorded. Essentially, FOIA allows FOIA now allows DP. I was around the and that's about all. Kind of curious about your reaction. Well, I was going to say, he issued an early why were they yeah, well, that's what it was. I think right.
Yeah. And I think that's a balance. That was something we really worked to get us to. And I think to be sure, this was all ways these things helpful. The outsourcing writing
It's very poor practice. We have to put it in how we got to that point should be the prerogative of the President of the United States. Yeah, like the President. No, I try to put myself. Yep. This is the way we've been doing it. That's all we So, a lot of
we still, I would say all the rules because a lot of those folks really understood how to do,
it's not a
really understood the cost benefits. That's right. And so the rules definitely did exhibit
by and large, you can't do
absolutely. Absolutely. Faster engagement. These rules were so complex, and yet we're getting through in 65 days. All those, and most of that was interagency.
But prior to you being here, it just gave more opportunities for debate and argument.
Yeah, that's right. Well, to be sure, there would be a lot more detail. We found it very helpful, as opposed to some other agencies, flimsy regulations out of DOT, where we had to do the analysis. Nothing there.
The executive branch just can't go do it. They've got to know the process.
Yeah, that's right. So in the George, well, it's true.
John Graham.
John's a serious data guy.
Good for you.
I have a lot of regard for him. A lot of disagree with him on the substance of it. He is a straight shooter.
So, I was president of the Commission.
Fabulous.
And I worked.
Don't let me interrupt. Go ahead.
Nobody really works. One year I was going crazy.
Yes.
One thing I would have asked this. One of our tasks from drivers keenly aware that they get through the process. The legal stuff typically gets marked out to agencies and justice. But the science piece, what is going to happen to that responsibility with respect to the new science policy, which is really how much discretion does the IRA have?
And then you would have the final piece. It's how it got really I think to get it from
in truth, it would take somebody standing up and saying, look, this is contradictory to the executive order. Even if you can't rely on it, we want to see what that other data says. Yeah, that's really a tough thing.
I want to come up and congratulate the new Jim.
Oh, God help me. I love Jim, but oh my Lord, God help me.
Drives me crazy.
He is a piece of work.
Does he still play the piano?
He still plays his keyboard because I still get emails from him.
Yeah, we all I had an office.
That was good. Thank you, Howard.
Yeah, thank you guys.
You ever been to his office?
No, I have not.
I think having the interagency stuff included in the response to comments, and Howard was mentioning some high-level summary of what things were not. Eddie over at the Department of Energy said this. It's just, why did this get changed if it was changed because of an interagency comment? We have to prepare, we meaning EPA, why something changed or didn't change based on public comment that came into the record. And sometimes, we get a million responses on a major rule. I would say 200 of those are going to be individual, probably some piece of information. The other 200,000, the other 800,000 is form things. But
you understand the phrase?
there's cities, and then there's international. And this one is the cities because I see the former mayor up here.
Dick, I'm George White. We talked on the phone. We have a while about, about the Mercury rule, and you were kind of making the point that we got to get out there outside. And then you went on vacation and said, I'll get in touch with you. It's not us. Never really had the conversation about there's nothing about EPA. No doubt. Hawkins. I think maybe it's curious. Yeah. So we may still want to. I'd be happy to do this. And I had very strong feelings. When I was here, Graham came in with the library. Good. Fought for us in time, perhaps enemy. Previous 15 years, wrote the same comment. And it was the one that got me invited. The only time I was invited to have lunch at the White House. And when we sat down, one of my notes said was, you can say it's possible now. It's fine. Why don't you say, you're put the money in right? See what numbers aren't that.
Her youngest son and my son.
As long as it's shadow price.
My wife, ex-wife, actually worked for Davis.
Nobody's going to say that.
Both.
I was very happy to put okay, I know.
One over here, right over there, just when you get there. I didn't mean to interrupt. No, thanks. I just saw there weren't seats here. Okay, thank you. Right, she went with her aunt and mom to right, River.
I went with the healthcare side. I only knew vaguely what was going on that and this stuff. Well, of course, the Greek root of politics is people. Can't avoid it. That's like saying there's no politics in law. Ha 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 ha. You know, right? Ingrid's about to bang the triangle. Literally, the triangle, yeah. Yeah.
Hello, hello. Hello.
I thought so. I just want to make sure. Tony, you're right. It is a xylophone. It was not a true triangle. This one works. Hey, Eric, can you take a picture of the panel as well at some point? Send it to me. Pretty please, thank you. I'm so sorry. EPA in the cities. It's the one you want to be at. Let me sit down one for two. Well, I think that's the appropriate silence, and the bells and gongs and xylophones have all been played outside. So welcome to our breakout panel on EPA in the cities. Welcome to American University's Washington College of Law. I know many of you have been here for much of the last 2 days. My name is Bill Snape. I'm a professor here. I'm also an adjunct, the Assistant Dean for Adjunct Faculty Affairs. We have an amazing panel, and it is a panel that will look at EPA in the cities, and it will have a particular DC flavor for reasons that will become apparent in a minute. But
all of our speakers are going to be at least indirectly touching upon this concept of cooperative federalism, the idea that EPA always has, by statute and by culture, worked with states and worked with localities, cities, from everything clean air, clean water, land use, and in this area, the Chesapeake Bay watershed is a huge issue, the Anacostia River is a huge issue, our relationship here in the district between Virginia and Maryland is a huge issue, and we have three panelists that I don't think it's an overstatement to say are going to bring it home, certainly with regard to the DC region, and we'll give you a taste of what's maybe happening across the country as well. Leading off will be, and their full bios are in the package, so I'm not going to get into their full bios, but leading off will be Julie Lawson, who's with the mayor's office, the current mayor of DC's office. She has a wealth of DC environmental experience, in fact, a wealth of DC area, Maryland environmental experience. She'll be our first speaker. Second will be Kareem Marshall, who's an alum here of the Washington College of Law. He has worked for many years at the DC Department of the Environment in a couple different capacities, and so he will bring that agency perspective to the table. And then, as I say, our cleanup hitter is a heck of a cleanup hitter. The former mayor of Washington, D.C., Anthony Williams, will wrap up our panel. All of our panelists want to keep their presentations relatively short. We're going to try to keep them to 10 minutes or less. And the reason was, as Mayor Williams himself said in our pre-planning call, we want to hear from you. We want to have some good questions. We want to have a dialogue. So hopefully we'll keep our preaching to a minimum. But I think these three are allowed to preach a little bit. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Julie, and then we'll just have the panel proceed from there. I think they're all going to stay seated and take it away. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everybody. So, like I said, my name's Julie Lawson. I'm the director of the Mayor's Office of the Clean City, which was actually established 20 years ago by Mayor Williams. So I'm excited to be next to him today and learn more about maybe what else I can do better. But thinking about what's the EPA's role, I was telling Dr. Snake beforehand that the EPA's activities in the metro area, particularly the Anacostia River, have been a big driver of a lot of what I've accomplished in my career without actually being a day-to-day partner. The Anacostia River was declared one of the 10 dirtiest rivers in the country. And a friend of mine, longtime activist and restoration specialist on the river, described the water as it's becoming a lot less viscous than it used to be. It was the district and Maryland coming together and saying we need to look at trash pollutants along with nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and other bacterial and other pollutants that the EPA was regulating, and that jurisdiction. Thank you. The jurisdiction's going to the EPA and saying that we want some kind of regulation on this to help drive our restoration effort forward and to put some limits in place on trash, led to all of the successes that DC and the metro area can look to now, like the bag law, the foam ban, and the extended food service ware ban, as well as the ban that Maryland just passed this month to ban styrofoam statewide, that we're hoping the governor will sign. But all of these things that have led to tremendous trash reductions in the river. And it was the partnership between the district and the suburban counties to make that happen, but also the EPA setting this limit that allowed all of these to go. I've been in the interesting position of the way that pollution diet, total maximum daily load, was written didn't match the way that other pollution diets for other pollutants are written, and had the opportunity to help NRDC write a lawsuit against the EPA, the district, and Maryland to challenge that. And then I changed jobs and became government, and NRDC won, and so I effectively sued myself and created a new project. But it was a great exercise in understanding how these regulations are put together and how that all fits. One other piece that I wanted to cover, I serve as the vice chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Chesapeake Bay Programs Executive Council, which is the body of the 6 governors and the mayor that pushed the watershed agreement forward. Trash had not been included in the watershed agreement, which really focused on phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment. Trash was really only viewed as a stewardship activity. How are we getting people out picking up trash in our streams, and not considered a pollutant? And through both the Citizens Advisory Committee and me, Bill will take, hammering home the idea that trash is pollution and trash is affecting our ecosystems, that it goes beyond a stewardship issue, we were able to get it included as an emerging pollutant in the toxics category within the watershed agreement, which has been really helpful in reminding, especially funders, how to support that advocacy work. I'm a little bit all over the place, but really looking forward to your questions. But those, I think, are 2 of the key ways that we've seen EPA's role with local government really pushing on moving the needle not only on trash in our water, but how we're using it on a day-to-day basis and what that looks like for residents and businesses. So,
thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate on the panel. When I was prepping for this panel, it was a little challenging because this is an extremely broad topic, and trying to pick out 3 areas that I could talk about within 10 minutes was kind of like picking your favorite kid. But I don't have children, so. So as a bit of background, from 2012 to 2017, I was the legislative director for the District Department of the Environment, which is now the Department of Energy and Environment. So if I switch between acronyms, DDOE, DOEE, it's the same thing. It's just after 4 years, some things stick. Now, in that role, I got to supervise the development of all environmental regulations for the District of Columbia. Now, it would be a vast overstatement to say that I did that by myself. We had a team of 10 attorneys, staff of PhDs, scientists, experts, people who have more years of expertise than I have years on this planet, coming up with really cutting-edge developments during the time that I was there. I was there to see the development of the stormwater and sediment erosion control regulations, which are a national model. So I was really fortunate to be at the agency during some pretty pivotal times. I also got to serve as the department's environmental justice coordinator. So I was able to connect with EPA Region 3 through those channels. So my remarks are essentially gonna cover 3 general areas. The first is going to be, I'm first gonna talk about regulatory impact, how EPA works with the district and cities broadly when it comes to issues of regulation. Second, I wanna talk about environmental justice. It's an amorphous area, but it's a critical area. And then finally, I wanna talk about issues of emerging concern. So the district is a unique case in that it's something more than a city, but still unjustly a bit less than a state. This status creates unique opportunities. So with your indulgence, I'm gonna talk about some rulemaking as an example. One of the, I think, best illustrative examples of, and it's a large example, but it's also a relatively small example. In 2013 and 2016, I got to witness the way we do the triennial water quality standards update. Now, talking to my peers in other jurisdictions, this is usually a pretty contentious process. You have several point sources or non-point sources within a jurisdiction that fight with the state agency over what their loads should be. There's a lot of argument over what the underlying science should be. And it's a multi-year process. And it's not rare for you to see a triennial water quality update come out on the 3rd year. So sometimes jurisdictions will be 3 years behind just because of the contentious nature of the process. Now, DC is lucky in that the DDOE or DOEE serves the dual role. They're both the state regulator and the local implementing agency. So they were both in charge of making policy and implementing policy. We also are pretty lucky in that the people who would have been our regulated entities, such as DC Water, were very forward thinking. So our process was only really delayed by administrative bureaucracy. We got our water quality update done, I think within a year and a half, which is from what my peers tell me is lightning fast. The other good thing about EPA is that it provides this implicit umbrella of regulatory backstop. With the understanding that something that's required by Section 303 of the Clean Water Act is going to be reviewed by the EPA, there's less of an inclination by regulated entities to go, well, you can't do that, that'll screw our business up too much. When people know that the regulations have the backing not only of the local jurisdiction, but also of the Environmental Protection Agency, it gives it an additional gravitas so that the stress of local political concerns becomes less of a factor. It's important to remember that most cities have delegated authority from a state, and EPA generally interacts with cities through the state. And again, this is one of those instances where DC benefits from its special existence. If you look at Flint, Michigan is a really good example. DC had a similar issue when dealing with its water quality. And it's also important to put it into context. Like these issues of water pollution don't occur necessarily because of malice. They occur because there's either a water source change or a change in the chemical composition and how we treat our drinking water, or there's a change in the preservative that's put in the water so that the stuff that's caked up in the pipes doesn't come loose. And DC had a very similar issue in 2001. When it happened in DC, we were able to react relatively quickly because we didn't have to deal with the bureaucracy that is stymieing some of the recovery efforts in Flint. Flint has to go through Michigan to the EPA. They don't have the ability to connect as directly with them as DC does. So in that way, we're advantaged by the fact that we are a city-state. And Flint also provides a convenient segue into the issue of environmental justice. This isn't the environmental justice panel, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it is one of those areas in which EPA is uniquely positioned to assist us. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a tool that they developed called EJ Screen, but EJ Screen is, it's a map, but it's an incredibly powerful tool. It allows you to do multiple iterative layers that add race, poverty, asthma incidents, health issues, and it gives cities the ability to use this tool to make real decisions, not just decisions based off of complaints, but decisions based off of actual data to do things that can not just mitigate harm, but also spread benefits. And I think that's one of the tools that EPA provides the cities that doesn't get enough credit, the ability to actually position local policymakers in a way where they can make decisions that directly benefit their residents and do it in a data-based way so that we know that we're not winging it. And then finally, I want to address solving emergent problems. So 3 conclusions in my mind are pretty well settled. Climate change is starting. We're not preparing to try to slow it. We're not preparing for it to come. It's here. We're trying to slow it down. Vulnerable populations, which are poor, elderly, infirm, are going to be the first to severely be infected. And nearly all US cities are either situated on coasts or rivers, which means cities are going to be hit first, hardest, and they're going to have the most affected residents. Most cities know this, and they tend to take the lead. So they're proactively mitigating factors that cause climate change by increasing purchase of non-carbon-based power. And DC was an early adopter of the Green Power Partnership, going back to at least 2010. Our renewable energy credit markets are among the most aggressive in the country, and they're only getting more aggressive. So when we talk about being able to put cities in a position to move forward and advance change, I think the EPA and most NGOs understand that if real change is going to happen, they're going to have to make the change through cities. The political landscape when it comes to states is too changeable. State jurisdictions have too many varied interests. Cities have true pain points. Cities know what's coming. Cities know that if we don't do something about it, then it's probably not going to get done in enough time. So finally, as we look forward to the next 50 years of the EPA, we're really finding the agency in a position to help undo the harm of bad decisions. Now, granted, no agency has a mandate to undo centuries of discrimination, racism, systemic disenfranchisement, but being able to provide science-based tools that are unassailable is one of the things that EPA does well, and irrespective of who's in the White House, irrespective of who's in the Congress, EPA's reputation still is pretty strong when it comes to being able to provide reliable, objective data. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Tony Williams, as you heard, former mayor. I like last mayor of the 20th century. It has a monumental quality to it. Regardless of what I did or didn't do or the quality thereof, it just sounds good. As a matter of fact, I went to my granddaughter's school and I was ready to laugh because this little girl asked me in the 3rd grade, "Did you know most of the presidents?" So yeah, general grade man, So the way I want to just kind of give you a view of the terrain with the environment in cities from a kind of bird's eye view level. We're just going to fly over and give you a couple thematic shots. This is a data-free presentation, ladies and gentlemen. So the way I look at the environment in cities is from a couple lenses. I mean, one, this is the 50th anniversary of EPA. It's also, you may know, the 150th anniversary of John Wesley Powell, his first descent down the Colorado River. I've paddled on many of the rivers in North America over a period of days and weeks, and I've paddled down the Colorado. I'm still in awe that someone without the benefit of hundreds of people going before them and all the maps and technology we have would go down, the river the way he did. Well, very, very importantly, not only did he, really accomplish a feat of great adventure and expedition, but while he was horrible on, like a lot of people in his day, his sociology and public policy and anthropology and all that was horrible. But his foresight when it came to water management was really profound. He really basically said to anyone who would listen, you've got to be really, really careful when settling this area out here because, hello, attention, there's not a lot of water. You've got to really pay attention to the water. So when I came to Washington, D.C. as mayor, I had this real sense of cities and rivers, and my friend George Hawkins, a great job he did with really beginning the massive cleanup of the Anacostia and really making WASA a brilliant organization. I think one of the great things Adrian Fenny did, give him a big hand. Thank you for all your work, George. I think of cities. Cities have always been identified in their earliest days, ancient cities. How are they settled? They're settled as areas of trade, as areas of scholarship, as areas of fortification and military security. A lot of that is really dictated by the environment and the land around them. So for cities, the environment isn't some side kind of discussion. It's really what cities really are about. Also, cities are really about one of the few areas we have, and you consider this important because into the next century, 70% of the world's population is going to live in a city. So how we relate to one another and interact with one another is really going to be formed and shaped by cities. So cities have to think of, well, how do we bring people together so they can come together, work together, and succeed together around major projects? I would argue the major projects that cities can really embrace and can really drive forward are around the environment. Maybe they're air issues, maybe they're water issues, whatever they may be. In Washington, D.C., they were first and foremost, not that we didn't have air issues, as all of you know, but water issues around the Anacostia, creating the Department of the Environment, working on a memorandum of agreement and the progress that we've made with other leaders in Maryland, Virginia, and the counties on the Anacostia, recognizing that it's a shared watershed, doing what we could with the relevant authorities and parties on the Potomac, although we're limited there because of our unique character as a city, and recognizing that, in my mind, if you look over the 50 years of federal-city interaction in general, and certainly federal-city interaction as it relates to the EPA, we've gone from, it's kind of like one axis is mandate, no mandate. Another axis is funding, no funding. you know, the sweet spot would be we're directed to do something and we have the funding, right? The hell for a lot of people would be no direction, no funding. But for a lot of city leaders, it's a lot of direction, no funding. And we've been through a lot of direction, no funding in that quadrant. That quadrant is hell, right? And out of that, and I was former president of National League of Cities, huge effort around the country by jurisdictions around the country to fight what were called, and they're still called, unfunded mandates. I think in the next iteration, I'd like to see the EPA in its interaction with local and state governments really look at not just funding what the federal authority is directing, but I think more wholesomely saying, you know, the federal government, state government, the city government have balance sheets. I don't want to sound like an accountant, but they've got balance sheets that they have to manage. So the way I look at your grand universal balance sheet as a city includes your public assets. Your public assets include things like your rivers. They include, I think, potentially things like your air. How can we, in a socially responsible way, use capital markets, again, in a socially responsible way, to try to monetize the value, right, of fixing public assets on our balance sheet? That, you know, a company would always try to do that because cities and counties and states exist in the zone we've been cradled, as I always said, in this kind of like the arms of tax-exempt debt. And it's because we kind of like do all of our business in tax-exempt. There's no real impetus for us to go out there into the kind of fierce, competitive world of private markets and try to do something there. Again, I'm not talking about like doing a sale leaseback of Notre Dame Cathedral or something, but I am saying that, you know, there's public value to be tapped there, and we ought to look at that as the next iteration of where we go. So I hope that those snapshots are helpful as we think about where we go into the future with EPA and cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, all three panelists not only were excellent, they all kept under 10 minutes as promised. So now it is your turn. And I see some people. We're going to start with Kelly Crawford, who's with the DC Department of Energy and the Environment. Thank you, Kareem. And Kelly could have been a panelist on this panel, but I know she's got a couple of questions and comments. So, Kelly. Sounds like that. Here, you can use this one. It's live.
There it is. Good morning. Thank you guys for being here today. You all kind of touched on this theme about how DC is uniquely situated, being the local and state authority. From those advantages.
Let's take a crack at that. Julie?
Yeah, I'll come back to the trash total maximum daily load on that question, and part of why we filed the lawsuit, actually. So the LA River was the first river to be regulated for trash under the Clean Water Act, and the load, the way that that one was developed was the same model as any other TMDL. You all are attorneys, right? So, by setting a load that is the maximum amount that the water could reasonably accommodate, and for trash, they set that as 0, which is really hard. It's easier in a place like Los Angeles, where it's flashy storms and the rivers are flashy, and you can block a lot of the trash from getting to the water by putting screens over the storm drains, because it's just not that often that water runs down them. And so you could capture a lot, but it was not going to work in a place like DC. And so instead, what they did was count all the trash in the watershed by literally a visual trash survey on the streams and tributaries, and figure out how much was being collected, and then said that's the baseline. Now you need to collect that much of what's left, and that will get you to 0. In theory, except that didn't account for growth, population growth. It didn't account for behavior change. We use a lot more disposable food packaging. It didn't account for It also didn't allow for outreach and education, which is very difficult to measure. Is a presentation to a classroom of 5th graders, how many pounds of trash is that worth? And so it became very fuzzy. And if you ended up picking up all that trash and there was still trash left, was the model accurate? Well, they ended up using the same system for Baltimore with potentially even less quality data for establishing their baseline. And that was what prompted NRDC and several partners to say that we don't want to see this carry further. We want to see an actual maximum load set the way it was intended. And I think that our point was proven when the Anacostia River Tunnel Phase 1 opened last year, and it's collected more than the entire watershed's annual load in 3 months. It has in trash, just of the stormwater that it collected of overflow that had been going into the river. So we demonstrated the point very closely. So I think that was just one example of EPA's learning from that. We're redeveloping what does that look like so that as more cities decide to regulate trash in their water, they can establish a more appropriate policy.
Any other comments on that?
Yeah, just quickly. I think one of the things that is, the EPA is uniquely suited to help us with, particularly Region 3. The district doesn't control all of the headwaters going into the Potomac. So cooperation with Maryland, Delmarva, the rest of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We also don't have direct control over any of our power sources. We don't generate in the district, aside from rooftop solar and some geothermal projects, very few geothermal projects. So being able to reach beyond our borders is a difficult task at best. And George also ran DOE for a bit, so he can talk about that too. But being able to cooperate and coordinate with our sister agencies or sister entities in other states, federal assistance with that is always welcome. I don't know that EPA is, in the current regulatory environment, I don't know that EPA is particularly suited to engage in those types of efforts. But moving forward, it would be very helpful.
Well, I could say, you know, if you look at the history of the 20th century, the federal government played a huge role in isolating cities as perceived, you know, pockets of poverty and pathology and every, you know, Escape from the City movies, remember them and all that? You know, the federal government played a huge role in that. And I think the federal government, if it put its mind to it, I mean, seems Pollyannish now because they're completely dysfunctional, but if they ever got their act together, the federal government could play a huge role in incentivizing smart regionalism, you know.
Thank you. I'm Bill Dickinson. I'm from Alexandria, and I'm working on water issues over there. So we're paying a lot of attention to what you all did over in DC, and particularly with George, learning from your successes and failures. Or let's say challenges. The question I had is just in regard to water, it's not cheap. It's huge, and you've spent billions. We're gonna spend less, but still on our population, it's a lot. So there's the issue of not just the cost of water, because the public is gonna bear that cost, the ratepayer, but also the impact it has on low-income people. And just sort of like a reaction out of that, because we've gotten a charge, a mandate, and without the money, as you say, Mr. Mayor.
Great question. Who wants to start out with that one?
So just quickly from the district's perspective, we have 2 stormwater charges. We have there's one that DC Water charges, and there's one that the district government charges. It's an equity issue, fundamentally. I think most of us in this room don't really have to worry about whether or not we can pay our water bills. And there are programs in place that are either ratepayer subsidized or district government subsidized that help reduce that load. But you're essentially moving money from one group of residents to another. So it is a hard policy decision. You have to make a decision as a jurisdiction. Who can actually bear this cost? Who should bear the cost? can't answer that for you.
That gets back to my, not to sound like a parrot, but that gets back to my monitoring the balance sheet. If you had an idea of the grand balance sheet, you'd be seeing not only the costs of cleaning up the Anacostia, but you'd be calculating the benefit. So instead of the argument being, oh my God, we're just throwing money down a rat hole, no, you're making an investment in over a 30-year, 40, 50-year period, subject to, you know, all the issues one has with that kind of model. You know, here are the benefits we're getting. I think that's why I say it's so important to do that. I hear people, George, all the time, because I run the federal city council, oh my God, we're going to die, these taxes on the Anacostia River. And I'm saying, I mean, look what's happening on the Anacostia River. I mean, just with a one tunnel and yada, 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 and people back off because they realize, yeah, you're right. I mean, we blow a lot of money, but this is not one of the examples.
Hi, Mayor Williams, I'm glad you're with us, voted for you twice. My question is about green infrastructure. I consider it one of the most promising and exciting developments in urban planning. My question is, where do we stand in DC? What's coming? And most importantly, what has been the relationship with EPA in either facilitating, hindering initiatives, and what would you like to see change or improve?
Well,
and George may have some comments about that as well. So.
I mean, I'll let my colleagues here from the district and speak more authoritatively about the district, particularly EPA. But I've found that in my time in public service, you know, there was a time, certainly when I was back in urban development, way before I was even in the finance area, you know, we were working with HUD, and your only hope of making it through the HUD wilderness was dealing with the PAS, the political appointees, maybe some of the SES. And then we've gone to a period now where in my experience over the last 4 or 5 years, your only hope of dealing intelligently with the feds is dealing with the career service. Because they're the only people who've gotten the memo. Everybody at the political level is completely, intentionally clueless. It's really horrible. I mean, in the Department of Interior, we had a beautiful deal ready to go. And I'm probably sinking my chances now because somebody's filming this, please don't. But we had this great program, public-private partnership worked out with a career service and some of the top SES people. And God, you know, Jesus, Lord, and Zinke and these people, they come in and they just completely screw the entire thing up. That's what a lot of city officials I talk to around the country are facing now, right? They're having great communication with the people at the staff level, nothing but interruption and chaos as you get up channel. On that hopeful note.
Can I just interject, because it's been the elephant in the room, and this is about EPA at 50, but we are living in a world where things are, as the mayor says, sometimes a little kablooey. So can we talk a little bit about how you as city officials, presidents have dealt with what's happening now at the federal? I mean, obviously, I want to continue with the question that was asked, but put into it the current challenges with the current administration.
I saw Bill Riley here as a great example where Bob knows I worked with Christy Todd Whitman, who I thought was a great EPA director. Both of them were appointed by Republicans. The damn EPA was created by a Republican, you know?
Julie or Kareem, what do you think about these dynamics?
So I'm actually pretty hopeful. Like I think this administration is challenging and is problematic and troublesome, but the country's been through worse, and we've come out of it, and we've come out better at the end. So this may be Pollyanna-ish, but I think we're gonna look back on this time period 10 years from now and go, wow, that was really horrible, but we got through it. And you have to take the long view, I think. EPA is 50, it's a relatively young agency. And look at the impact it's been able to have just in 50 years. Like, you can actually breathe in Los Angeles now. If you said that 30 years ago, people would have laughed at you. The Anacostia River is getting there. And pretty soon you will actually be able to recreate in the river. I grew up in the city. The idea of swimming in the Anacostia used to terrify me. So, and the EPA is a huge part in that. And of course, like, our local partners, advocates, they're all just as important. But the reality is that overall, things are going to improve. So. I
don't, on a day-to-day basis in my role, I don't have much interaction, or my office doesn't do regulation or anything like that. So it's a little tangential from federal influence, but in a number of ways, just where I sit in the executive office of the mayor, I do also see some ways that our local government is actually strengthened by these challenges at the federal level. I got to be part of the response of how we held up our public services during the partial federal government shutdown. And I was really amazed and inspired by how well we all came together to respond to that. And frankly, we did a way better job than the feds at keeping our home clean. And I think that allowed us also to take steps to put into place things. We had concerns about courts, and we established authority to issue our own marriage licenses. Just little baby steps almost into our own self-determination and our statehood push. And I think that as traumatic as that event was for our federal employee residents and for the country as a whole, as a district government, I think we made some strides forward from it.
Julie, I think that's really a good point, and certainly my observation is that the recent DC Renewable Energy Center, which was a legislative action, a very laudable legislative action, was in part motivated by we're still in Paris, we're still committed to our international goals of reducing our greenhouse gases. So I hear you. I think there's a lot of examples of that. Mr. Hawkins, you've been mentioned a few times. You had your hand up. I think you get the mic now.
Thank you, Mayor Williams, for the shout out. I worked for 3 mayors. I'm sorry that I was not able to work for you. That would have been a privilege and a pleasure. But a very specific question on this financing issue and affordability. We've been, for example, Clean Rivers Project, multi-billion, permits, multi-billion. We were funding based on water use to all customers. When we were talking about innovations yesterday at a panel at this same program, one of the ideas was, as development is improved because of the public investments that are being made in the river, what about some sort of tax increment financing so that those entities that are generating economic value from the public investment we have all made in a public resource pays a little more disproportionate into the cost of that because of the benefit and direct economic outcome. Same could be for metro stations. Had there been a funding system of all the development that occurs around a metro station based on a public investment, how could some of that investment and in economic growth be captured into the cost, lessening the burden on some of our lower income? The toughest, I did 65 rate hearings at DC Water, and I remember most vividly folks would come up to me with their bills and say, you persuaded me that this work is valuable. I don't have any more money. And every time you raise rates on me, I have to cut off something else in my expenditure because I don't have any more. And those really tore at my heart because I did not know the answer, given, as you said, it's just shifting from one customer to another, although we have very significant affordability programs in the city. But I wonder how we could use that mechanism of who gets the benefit and how do we generate some value back into the cost.
Yeah, to make it short, I totally support that. I think that that's a way forward. I think it could be part of a broader effort to really recalibrate, a lot of the tax revenue structure. We did some of it about 4 or 5 years ago, but we need to do more of it because it's all kind of imbalanced because of the unique taxing authority of the district. I was going to say, but I won't say that I won't. So I was going to say something about family leave. Why do we have a family leave program where 75% of the people in the program don't live in DC? That doesn't make any sense to me. Maryland just enacted one and they excluded people who don't live in Maryland. I just think we have to be smarter. I think we should have family leave. The reason I say all this is, one, we need to look at we have to always be mindful of this balance sheet. I'm talking about the structure I'm talking about. And the other thing is, I hear a lot of mayors and county leaders to this day say, oh, we're going to do what we're going to do and we don't need the federal government. I think I'm all for, if you're sitting on the road and the stagecoach isn't coming, you got to start walking. I'm all for that. On the other hand, if there's some hope of the stagecoach coming, or if I can get the stagecoach to come, I'm going to work to do that. I tell fellow mayors, county executives, yeah, we ought to do what we can without the federal government, but there's no substitute for the federal government if you harness its capacity, because it's the only government that's basically the reserve currency of the world that can write checks that don't bounce. Why would you want to ignore them?
We have a question there.
So hi, I'm Martha Rudolph. I'm from Colorado. I am not an ex-EPAer. I am an ex-state person. I'm going to take you out of DC a bit, if I could, but still would like your perspective. One of the issues that I think many states deal with when we're dealing with cities is land use decisions. And I'd like your perspective on the ability, the necessity of EPA and the states working with municipalities to really think about land use from the perspective of environmental impacts. So we're talking industry, placement. This is an EJ issue, of course. Traffic patterns, which is would be an air quality issue. We have in the past partnered with the city of Aspen on a SIP element where Aspen agreed to sweep the streets when we had a PM problem, and that went into the SIP. So I'd like, we can't, states can't, we don't have the authority, at least in Colorado, and I think most states, to look at land use as an opportunity for dealing with environmental issues. And so we need to work with our municipalities on that. So I'd like your perspective on how can states and EPA work with municipalities on land use decisions, on traffic pattern issues, on perhaps agreements to put city responsible actions into SIPs so that we can all benefit from that. Thank you.
So that's what I meant by the federal government has huge capacity, if it wanted to really incentivize smart regionalism, smart growth, better land use. The same way they basically drove horrible land use decisions, created this massive mess we're looking at now, they can actually start helping to reverse that. One of the things you didn't mention that I think is huge is density. I can't tell you how many friends, I'm sure you all have a lot of friends and they're so proud of their house, they're so environmentally conscious, and they're living out in a place where they basically have carved out part of a forest. You got to drive a car 4 hours to get there, and they consider themselves saving the world. It's like crazy. Cities are bad, and where I am living is good. No, cities and a lot of density, traffic is actually good, because biggest generator, I sound like I'm preaching, but you all know this, biggest generator of carbon is the built form. Where's most of that? Hello, it's in cities.
I just want to add, that's really a big macro point to chew on. I wanted to make a more lawyerly point at a more pedestrian level, which is the Obama administration was not as aggressive as I personally would have liked, but under the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act permitting program, the Clean Water Act, TMDL program, with that regulatory structure was beginning to impact land use. Not directly, because they didn't want to be aggressive about it because of this cooperative federalism, but they were creating the framework by which it was allowing local governments to make those good or better decisions. And I think this is one of the casualties of the federal government being AWOL on at least permitting at this point on air and water, which is that the states now, whether they have money or not, are not getting any direction. So it is sort of a free-for-all to some extent. I'd love to hear from Julian Karim, though, as well. That's a really good question. And I'm glad he got out of DC just for a second. It's the mountains of the Rockies.
So if I can use DC as an example, as opposed to trying to address Colorado, because I don't want to talk about something I don't know. Most jurisdictions, most states have a local version of the of the Environmental Policy Act. DC has one as well. And one of the things that you notice is that a lot of the programs that are either funded by or overseen by the EPA actually have an impact on development. Like in DC, it's really difficult to do any kind of project without at least considering the potential presence of petroleum in the ground. Like you have to at least think about it. So the underground storage tank program or the leaking underground storage tank program has a step in every significant project in the city. air quality, transportation studies. The tools are there. I think that the EPA is uniquely positioned in order to, one, get to the cooperative federalism issue and regional coordination so that, especially in states like Colorado that are extremely large, have a lot of, have cities that are surrounded by large, sparsely populated areas, the ability to coordinate amongst multiple counties, states if necessary, and cities is something that only the EPA can do really, or can only facilitate. So having that ability to go beyond, okay, well, we have these programs in place in our jurisdiction. How do we get additional information about air quality in the neighboring jurisdiction? How do we require other jurisdictions to take their development into account when they're building something that may be upwind from us? That's something only the EPA can do, really.
This is a little bit tangential, but your question brings to mind to me the debate over the Conowingo Dam in the Chesapeake Bay, where the dam itself is located in Maryland, but it's on the Susquehanna River, so it's almost exclusively water coming from Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania being so far behind on its benchmarks toward the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, that it, now with larger storms, there's a sediment backlog, it's polluted toxic sediment, and then a lot of trash and organic debris behind the dam. And with heavy storms, it washes over and is causing pollution throughout the entire main stem of the bay, which obviously has impacts downstream for Maryland and Virginia. And frankly, if it's allowed to continue pouring over, is going to undo all of the work that the 6 states in the district have been doing for the last 10 years. So that became a question, how do we solve this? Like, it's in Maryland's jurisdiction, are they responsible for it? It's Pennsylvania's pollution, are they responsible for it? We knew that Pennsylvania was never going to take care of it, and they were not going to be held accountable for it. But at the end of the day, the pollution from it was going to be a burden on all of us. And so EPA, again, it doesn't get into land use and interaction there, but EPA did, with the jurisdictions, establish an agreement for how they would all contribute to the cost for the cleanup, because it's important. The dam is also important for energy production. The district managed to get their contribution to it reduced to 0 because we don't contribute any of the pollution, nor do we receive any of the energy. And so in that case, that was an important negotiation, but we were at the table to make that negotiation and supported in general that all of the 6 states were then going to be part of the solution to that.
I'm a big fan of the movement. I know there's one with Lake Erie, which is a beautiful lake. It's just been completely trashed by all the surrounding states like Ohio and the farm people. It's a shame because it's a beautiful lake. Anyway, so there's now a movement, right, to create rights for lakes and rivers, and I'm a big fan of that. I think they should have respected in law. With the current configuration, it's going to be hard, but civil rights and a lot of stuff was hard. I think we ought to be pushing for defining constitutionally and in common law rights for precious parts of the public realm, like Lake Erie or the Chesapeake Bay or the Susquehanna River. Look at the Missouri River and the flooding on the Missouri River is because of the massive channelization of the river all these years. It clearly hasn't worked, isn't going to work. People down in New Orleans tell me it's just a matter of time before the Mississippi busts out of the Atchafalaya detour and basically strands New Orleans. I mean, these entities should have rights.
Thank you, Mayor, for that on Lake Erie. For those who don't know, the local voters did vote that Lake Erie would have legal rights. It was a somewhat significant recent development. Sir, you've been waiting very patiently. It's your turn now.
No problem, no problem. I'm a patient man. Dave Ulrich and to keep it out of D.C. for a while, from Chicago, 30 years with US EPA, and then 14 years with a group of 140 US and Canadian mayors in an organization Mayor Daley started. And you're absolutely right. It was the city of Toledo that, in fact, led the movement to give Lake Erie rights. It was strongly fought against by the agricultural interests and others, but I agree with you very much. New Zealand and the Maori people have done something similar in terms of rights for rivers over there. So all of the current and budding lawyers here, a whole new area that could be explored. I know in my work for 140 mayors, and it's not easy, it's hard working for even one mayor, but 140, it's tricky. What drove them craziest, I think, about the federal government and EPA is, number one, the lack of timely decisions about things, and number two, once they got decisions, they'd often get 3 or 4 that were inconsistent with one another, either from the same agency or others. We're looking forward now, and you've really put some, I think, wonderful ideas out about kind of monetizing the value of public investments that are out there. And one thing Mayor Emanuel did when we put hundreds of millions into the Chicago River was put an extra fee on the tour boats on the river to at least collect something, and it's a step in the right direction. With Mayor Bloomberg's leadership and others, it's clear that cities, even without federal government assistance, are leading the way on sustainability, carbon reductions, or whatever. What more can be done to put cities in even more of a position to be leaders in this environmental enterprise of the future?
Thank you for that. Who wants to go first there?
So I think planning is probably one of the critical aspects that gets overlooked. I think Singapore is a really good example of being able to take a jurisdiction that has certain constraints, take a very long-term view on where you want both the economy, environment, and population and housing to look like in a city. Singapore has this model where they make 20-year plans, and they revise the 20-year plans every 5 years, and they stick to their plans really consistently. Singapore has no farmland within its borders. They grow all of their food in Malaysia. But they made a decision. We're going to house our people. We're going to grow our food in another jurisdiction. Their aqueduct, their sole source of water is an aqueduct, and it's a tremendous resilience issue for them. They know they're extremely vulnerable with their water source, but because of that, they've made other decisions about the way the city is managed. You're not allowed to chew gum because gum has wrappers. Wrappers become litter. Litter encourages more litter. The streets in Singapore are pristine, even in the slums, just pristine. The long-term planning thing, and it's easy to do that in Singapore because it was a military dictatorship for so long. Granted. Federalism is a little bit messier, and it requires a little more flexibility. But when you have instances where, like the district is actually a good example of planning. We've got a history of planning, and it only gets stronger, and we're getting better at adhering to them. When I started my new position, one of the first things they gave me was a plan that was developed under Mayor Williams. So the fact that that is still informing what we're doing today shows that the planning is becoming more entrenched and it's being more respected. We're saying, okay, we've gone through the process of saying this is where we want to be. We're thinking about where we're going to go, and we're going to move towards that. And if we need to adjust, we can. But being able to say, okay, that's our goal, we're working towards our goal, I think that helps. So that's it.
I have a question related to that to follow up to the panelists, which is, would we have to, if we really wanted in the district only, just to pick a manageable area here, if we wanted to create a system that Mayor Williams has been laying out where we really do start monetizing these benefits and really calculating costs and trying to do what George Hawkins says, trying to reallocate based on use and benefit, would that have to be done legislatively in the district, or could that begin to be done administratively? Is it already beginning to happen administratively? I want to talk about, because there's enthusiasm. I've heard it from different quarters of the room and in different expertise. How would that look in the district if we were going to take an aggressive step? I think we're already sort of doing it in some instances, but if we really wanted to embrace it, It's a genuine question. What would that look like? Would it have to be legislative? Could the agencies begin to do things? I'm talking in an ideal world. I realize there are practical reasons why this may not happen tomorrow. Anyone?
Well, I actually think the district CFO, Jeff DeWitt, is actually first rate. And he's actually one of the leaders in the country of really cataloging all the district's assets that are traditionally calculated as assets. So I think we're actually got to step over a lot of jurisdictions because we have a Department of Environment, we have a very skilled CFO to really embark on the next step, which is trying to start calculating the benefit of these broader assets, you know, in the public realm, not held directly by the government, but let's say under the trusteeship or the stewardship of the government or the body politic that I think we could begin to catalog. But in order to do that, and I'm a big supporter of the mayor, I think she's doing a great job. You can always know what's coming. I think that, I hope that the new public-private partnership office that we're getting going now in the district is going to get going faster than the last one, because the last one I felt like I was on a JetBlue flight just stuck on the tarmac. So I just...
Any other? Are there any other questions? I had one question just to follow up. If there are, we'll get to you. We talked, when I watched the first administrator, William Ruckelshaus, they had a video of him. I think some of you saw that yesterday. And he talked about the integrity of the agency and how the people need to trust the science of and a lot of interesting things in these times. But he also talked about, and this was interesting, this is what struck me as an EPA administrator, that he had to think about constituent services, that he had to actually think about the people that his agency was serving. And then in our pre-meeting, we talked, can three of you talk about constituent services? Because here we are talking about highfalutin policy, but as the mayor knows, and as you all know, and as George Hawkins knows, people are impacted by these decisions. And sometimes it's awkward, to say the least. So talk a little bit about constituent services in this EPA city, Milu.
So as one whose phone is probably ringing with residents right now, my office is very constituent focused. It is in the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs. That was an adjustment for me. Coming from the nonprofit sector where you get money and you develop a program and then you go out into the community and you try to sell it to people and you run into a wall and wonder why people aren't accepting it, to the flip side of day after day, residents calling with their concerns and questions, and you have to come up with the solution to that. And then it's an easy sell because they asked you to do it. So it's been an interesting education to then also take those types of programs and think about the regulatory framework that we're also working in. The Office of the Clean City runs the Adopt-a-Block program. It wasn't tracking any of the cleanups that the neighbors were doing. They're committing to a minimum of 4 cleanups a year for 2 years to pick up trash in their neighborhood, but it's not being counted the way that we track every pound of trash picked up at a stream cleanup. So the first thing I did was, we're gonna track this stuff, but these folks aren't coming into the program thinking that they're protecting the environment. They think that they're cleaning up their neighborhood and building stronger neighbor connections. So we can't make it complicated. I can't ask them, you know, did you collect any hazardous material that might be regulated under something else, because they're not thinking that way. So we really are just asking how many people, how many bags of trash, where was it, before and after picture. But at least it gives us some data to then report to the EPA as far as our trash collection goes. The other thing that I keep hammering in my Bay program work is that the Bay program itself often tends to forget the people. And I even, like, I wear this pin a lot that says, people live here. You know, there was a meeting a couple of years ago that we had in Baltimore where some of the folks in the room were frustrated with the decaying infrastructure in Baltimore, saying, why don't we just, like, we just need to fix the pipes, fix the tunnels, raise the taxes. And I was like, but the city is a city built for 900,000 with a population of 600,000, and half of them don't pay income taxes because they're in poverty. Like, you can't just raise the taxes to fix the infrastructure. We need to look at other solutions. So you can't just put a consent decree down and say, hey, population that's dealing with numerous other social challenges, fix it.
So I work in the Office of East of the River Services, and our office was started shortly after January, I think after MLK Day. And the office exists because there is both a perception and a reality that wards 2, 3, 1, and 6 get a better level of service delivery than ward 7 and 8. Now, that's a statement that has both some perceptual and some structural truths to it. So our challenge is to identify these issues, identify the instances where services may not be being delivered equitably, which is great because I get to keep my environmental justice hat on. But we also are looking at it from the perspective of, okay, well, what's structurally different about the way that one population is engaging with the government than the other portion of the population is? And there's some very real structural issues that prevent people from engaging in the way that they might in different parts of the city. Access to transit becomes one of those issues. I was just in a planning meeting yesterday where the planners want to build a footbridge that is completely inconsistent with the way that the people in the neighborhood live, but it's something that would have gone over great in Glover Park. So being able to identify these issues and come up with solutions that are sustainable, environmentally sound, but also match the population that you're addressing. There is no one-size-fits-all issue when you're dealing with constituents. Everyone has their own way in which they engage with their environment, with their neighbors, with their house. So you have to take that into account if you're actually going to be serving them. You have to take these things into account. So we plan to fix everything within a year, and we'll let you know how that goes.
Press here for that, right? Well, we're running. I think you're the former deputy administrator of EPA, Bob, right? Guess the last question. We're near the end of our panel.
It's a little question, but it's also maybe some thoughts here. Probably some people know this, that I've spent the first 11 years of my career as the deputy director of planning for the city of Baltimore under William Donald Schaefer, the mayor back in the, I'm going to say back in the 70s. But one of the things, my first job at the city was working on the 208 Water Quality Management Plan. And I became one of the only people in the city that understood what was happening under the Clean Water Act. This is like in 1973, 74, when the Clean Water Act just was enacted in 72. And the federal government had $500 million a year to distribute to do these area-wide water quality management plans, which involved the cities and the surrounding areas. Now, some of those plans actually came out to do some good things, but one of the things, they were wildly premature, because at the same time, everybody's trying to upgrade their sewage treatment plants, running around in circles trying to get construction grants, and all this, billions and billions of dollars were being spent in the 70s, as they are now, George, to upgrade sewage treatment plants. This is before we saw all the stuff leaking out into the streams. But I say, one of the things that I was able to do in Baltimore is I was able to get people to walk every mile of the streams in the city and look for not only the overflow, but all the exfiltration when the pipes are running under pressure. My only point is that authority still exists. That authority still exists for appropriations to get funding to do this kind of planning. Now that we're at a more sophisticated level, I think the cities and the Conference of Mayors helped get enacted legislation a year or two ago that provided an integrated water planning authority for cities so they could look at their drinking water, their storm water, and their sewer stuff together, and then figure out the impact on the population together as opposed to each one, redo some of the consent orders to get that to work better. One other thing that's related to that authority for money is the amount of money that's being appropriated to the community development block grant funds. And I know everybody's going to say not enough, right? That's what everybody who knows about cities is going to say, CDBG, not enough. Well, almost $100 billion have been appropriated through CDBG in the last 5 years for hurricane recovery. Wouldn't it be, how hard would it be to convince normal humans in the Congress, and there are some, that appropriating more on an annual basis under CDBG to get ahead of and become more resilient. And when you get into that,
conversation, you start getting into how to integrate the water quality planning, the air planning. And the last thing I'll mention is, and I'm thinking about the future of EPA here, EPA has a role to play in that, whether it's integrating the air and the water work with a longer-term resilience plan and trying to convince the Congress to put more money into it so cities could do adequate planning on this. It's already been mentioned how many cities are, at risk here, including Phoenix with heat. So Phoenix is on a river, it just doesn't run that often. It's called the Rio Salado. But the other point here is that during the Obama administration, there was an effort to get HUD, DOT, and EPA to work together on a sustainable cities thing where we actually reviewed each other's grants so that they could become integrated, even with the small amount of money that we had. So there's things that EPA could do. It could help advocate for some of the things I'm mentioning here, and mayors en masse. I know mayors are dealing with opioids, they're dealing with crime, they're dealing with all kinds of other justice issues that transcend environmental justice. But mayors gathering together and saying, another couple of billion a year in the CDBG, so you don't have, maybe we can reduce the 100 billion every 5 years we're having to put into it to recover from disasters, might not be a bad accounting approach for us to take with Congress. But I think there's a way to think about a renewed interest in that kind of work. The authorities all exist, and mayors can be somebody who with an EPA who's interested, can be somebody who can push that forward. So I'm just throwing that out there as something to think about.
That was a powerful statement, and unless anyone on the panel wishes to up that, I think that's a great way to end this panel. We are at the end of our time. Can you please join me in giving a big round of applause for our panelists?